If you came here this morning and wanted to see the over 100-year foundation of Trinity Baptist Church, you could put on some coveralls, go right around the corner here, and there's a crawl space. You could, if you wanted to, you could crawl underneath the building here and see who built this church in 1914, Robert told me this morning. On the other hand, if you wanted to see the 2,000-year-old foundation of Trinity Baptist Church, you just look at this. You just look at this, the communion table, because this, for 2,000 years, far beyond Trinity Baptist existence, but in the community of Christ's people all around the world for 2,000 years, over 2,000 years, this is foundational. This is foundational. This is the reason that the physical foundation was built in 1914 here on Cordova Street, because of this. So in one sense, Trinity Baptist physical foundation is really the superstructure on the ultimate foundation, right? And this looks back, it looks present, it looks forward. It looks back obviously to Christ's last night with his disciples, and then he says, "Do this in remembrance of me," and here we are, we've just done it here on September 3rd, 2023, and it looks forward. Do this as often as you do it in the future. So this is, as we've said a couple of weeks ago, when you take communion, you are really also returning to the foundation of human existence that biblically that says the really true foundation of life is relationship. It's vertical relationship with God through Christ. It's horizontal relationship with one another. And so we do it expressing our communion with God through Christ. We do it in expression of our communion with each other. So all that to say, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you. And thank you for not only your prayers for each other, but I really appreciated your prayers for me personally. I've been gone for few weeks now back on the East Coast, and it was almost, as I was telling some of the guys this morning, it was almost the perfect trip, seeing people. And so I thank you. I missed you, but it's good to be back. But in light of these notions about foundation, we're going to look at the Gospel of John this morning, chapter 10. And the other thing that's really so true. Here we are, first Sunday in September. And if you have had, even if you didn't grow up going to church, if you came to church life later in life, you're probably aware, at least in Christian Bible-believing churches, that September is really the beginning of what we call the ministry year. It's the church year. January 1st is our chronological year, obviously. But for, 100 years or so, this is always, churches at least across America, have always seen September as this begins the church year, the ministry year. And also because somewhere in the late 1880s, American football became so popular, somehow that came into the church, and churches all across America are planning a kickoff Sunday. Have you heard that term before? It's a football term, but we use it, right? So we're going to kick off the year, and it comes right out of football. It's not in the Bible, but it's useful, right? Diana over here used to live in Boston. 2 weeks ago, I was in a church in Boston, and they were so excited because next Sunday is kickoff Sunday for Boston, and it's going to be good, So don't know if Trinity's had kickoff Sundays or not, but regardless, we need to take advantage of that, don't we? We need to look at our culture in which we live and say, okay, the culture offers us something. January 1st, the Bible says don't fall down and worship a certain day, don't make it into a fetish. But on the other hand, it's kind of nice to have January 1st, right? To start a new year. It's kind of nice to have September. And, part of it was the old academic calendar. You go back to school. Now school starts in August. It's a little bit different. But there's something about Labor Day weekend that you kind of sense that, okay, summer's kind of over now, isn't it? We're going to celebrate with a barbecue tonight and all that. But more importantly, as we come into John's Gospel, chapter 10, we're really going to look now today and next week at what you might call foundational truths. It's the foundational time of the year for the church year, but it's also in chapter 10 of John, these foundational truths that really need to be revisited on a regular basis. It doesn't mean that you don't grow and move beyond the foundation and grow in your understanding and faith. But the foundation, the bedrock of all that we do, especially in a church like Trinity Baptist, is certainly this. And the question we're posing, and this is in your on your outline this morning, is this: who would you rather follow? One of the things I think that if you have your eyes and your ears open, not everybody admits this, but if you listen long enough and look long enough, almost everybody's looking for someone to lead them. Everybody wants to follow someone, and even the most self-centered, self-absorbed person who says, "I'm the master of my own ship, I'm the captain of my own fate," everybody reports to somebody. Have you ever worked in an organization where you get someone at the top that says everybody reports to me? Well, ultimately, even the person at the top reports to somebody, right? And so who would you rather follow? That's a good question, isn't it? So we're going to ask ourselves 3 more questions on top of this, and then we're going to ask a 4th question in the conclusion. So who would you rather follow? First of all, would you rather follow someone who knows your nemesis? What's a nemesis? A nemesis is someone or something who is an inescapable adversary to you. Someone who has your worst interests at heart, right? That's a nemesis. And in verses 1 to 6, let me just read those and then we'll come back and make a few comments. Jesus has just had in chapter 9, as we said about a month ago, last time we looked at this, he's had this encounter with the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the Jews, and it was over this man who was blind, and he restored his sight. And then he gets into this dispute with the Pharisees. And now he says in verse 1 of chapter 10, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice. He calls to his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers." This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So who would you rather follow? Someone who knows your nemesis. The inescapable adversary, primarily, if you're a Bible believer, is Satan himself, right? All begins in Genesis chapter 3, the encounter with Adam and Eve. And then, and by the way, I want to say a big thank you to Robert Stevenson for not only preaching the last 3 Sundays, but teaching Sunday school and men's Bible study and getting the church painted and cooking hamburgers tonight. And, I'm not sure when Robert sleeps, but Mimi sees him periodically. So anyway, But in Robert's study in 1st and 2nd Peter over this last year, that's, and who better than Peter to write about this? Because if there's anyone in the Bible who had to, other than Jesus himself in the wilderness temptation, who other than Peter has firsthand experience with the adversary, the nemesis of Satan himself? So 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8 says, Satan is like a prowling lion moving about seeking whom he can devour. Now, we said this a long time ago, I can't remember when, but there is this idea in modern society that people get a little bit upset at, and sometimes you get accused of being paranoid, and even sometimes Christians, Bible believers, people will listen to you and they'll say, you still believe in Satan? This is 2023. Well, you paranoid? You have some sort of weird mental illness that you believe in Satan? And of course, the natural response to that is, well, Satan's not my idea. Jesus believed in Satan. Jesus had more firsthand knowledge of Satan than anybody, right? If Satan was originally created as an angel and then fell, according to the Bible, then who knows Satan best? Who believes in Satan more than anybody, whether you're modern or not? Jesus himself. So if you're going to follow Jesus, you got to grapple with that, right? And so there's an adversary, there's a nemesis, Satan himself, and sometimes that's a direct attack. Other times it's more subtle. In chapter 9, the nemesis of God's people, it was mediated not directly from Satan, but it was actually, sadly enough, and this often happens, it was through religious people, right? It was the Pharisees, the people that were given responsibility to be the spiritual guides of the Jewish people. And they were a nemesis. They were an inescapable adversary, blocking. And the other thing that you read in chapter 9, and if you really want to get a hold of this, I really encourage you, sometime this week, open up your Bibles to the Old Testament. If you really want to understand what the Pharisees were doing and why Jesus was so upset with them, you have to understand that this was nothing new. They were basically repeating a problem that had been rampant throughout the whole history of Israel. Read Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel, chapter 34. And you will read why religious leadership had not only failed miserably, but it was under judgment. And I'm just going to read a couple of verses here. This is Ezekiel chapter 34. He says, "Thus says the Lord God, the shepherds of Israel who have been feeding yourselves, should not shepherds feed the sheep? You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with the wool, you slaughter the fat ones, but you do not feed the sheep. The weak you have not strengthened, the sick you have not healed, the injured you have not bound up, the strayed you have not brought back, the lost you have not sought, and with force and harshness you have ruled them. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd, and they became food for all the wild beasts. My sheep were scattered. They wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. My sheep were scattered over all the face of the earth, with none to search or to seek for them." And then Jesus comes all those centuries later, and he looks out over the people and he says, "I have compassion on you because you're like sheep without a shepherd." You think this didn't just happen. This had been going on for centuries, where people that were given the privilege and the responsibility of leading the spiritual lives of human beings took the privilege and ignored the responsibility. And that's what the nemesis of these people are. This is what Jesus is talking about here. And so this whole notion of shepherd and sheep, the whole chapter 10 is about that. Now there's a third nemesis. That's not just religious leadership, that's just people in general. And here's something that I bet you've thought about. I know a lot of you are parents. You have raised children, or your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles, and even if you're not a parent or an aunt or uncle, you probably are around kids. You have kids in your neighborhood. You have influence. I've just heard this so many times. I don't even question it anymore. And it gets expressed in so many ways. So many parents, so many grandparents, so many adults that have responsibility for children have said this in so many ways. They said, one of the most difficult challenges you have in guiding a child is a child comes in to life and essentially they're trusting. They trust adults. They believe what you say, generally, even though it's not 100%. But generally speaking, there's kind of an innocence in a child. And the decision you have to make as a parent or as an adult influence is, when do you introduce a child to the reality that not everybody has their best interests at heart? When do you help a child move from innocence to discernment? Because if you don't do that, especially as a parent, your child will be in danger. Someone's going to hurt them. If they trust everybody, eventually somebody's going to hurt them, right? You know that if you've been a parent, a grandparent, or an influence adult. Now flip it to the reverse. And sometimes you see this, not as often. What happens, though, if you go to the other extreme, and as soon as your child is able to understand, you begin to tell them, everybody's bad, everybody's out to hurt you. Don't trust anybody. Nobody, whether they're over 40 or not, is the old saying used to go. And so then you have other children, and sometimes you'll see it really young, where there's just a suspicion, even in a child. And certainly as adults become, we don't trust anybody, And so here's the challenge. This is a nemesis, because how do you, as a biblical person, the Bible basically looks at people and says, people are a blend. We're blended. Even if you're a follower of Jesus, you're not perfect. There's one God in the universe, and it's not you, as we've said before here. So how do you raise a child, and how do you function as an adult with this balanced perspective on people where you don't allow them to become your nemesis? Because on one hand, you learn if a person is trustworthy, right? You kind of have to test people. On the other hand, you also learn that some people aren't. Some people have your best interests at heart, some people don't. And it's a balance, and it's important not only for a child, it's important for adults to learn that. Because if you're too naive, it's a danger to your existence and to those that you're responsible for. Okay, so who would you rather follow? Jesus he uses this analogy of being a shepherd of the sheep. And he then moves from that to say, well, the reason we have a nemesis is because of our nature. So it's not only someone who knows your nemesis, but the second point is, would you rather follow someone who knows your nature? And what is the nature of human beings? Sheep. Sometimes you get into these social occasions where you go around, you're at a dinner party or something, and you go around the table and you say, if you were an animal, what would you be? Have you done that? You've probably had those little games. Well, I'm a lion, or I'm a tiger, or I'm a iguana, or whatever. But biblically, it's not 100%. There are a few other animals that get incorporated here. But essentially, especially in the New Testament and Old as well, we're sheep. We're sheep. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that, first of all, that to be a human being, on one hand, you're the crown of creation. God spent all that time creating. Read Genesis 1 if you haven't done it lately. And then at the very end, he says, now I'm going to create man and woman. You, as a human being, you have the breath of God in you. This is not I used to work with a youth pastor he used to use this, it was kind of a throwaway line, but actually the more I thought about it, it's not sacrilegious. He used to say to the high school kids, he'd say, this side of the Trinity, you're hot stuff. And, for a while there, I thought, well, that's kind of crude. But the more you think about it, that's really true, isn't it? To be a human being, you're not God, you're not the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, there's only one. But to be a human being means God crowned his creation with you. So begin with that, but then move on to understand that God knows our nature, that, okay, we're the crown of creation, but we're also sheep. And that explains something. That explains one of the most honest passages in the Bible. If you read Romans chapter 7, when the Apostle Paul has that long speech about, look, I look at myself, I know the right thing to do, but I don't do it. What's wrong with me? And he even calls himself wretched. He says, wretched man that I am. I know the right thing, but I don't do it. And you know what he's onto there? That's the age-old dilemma of human life, right? You're the crown of creation, you're hot stuff next to the Trinity, but you're also a sheep. There's one God in the universe, and it's not you. Therefore, nothing is ever going to be 100%. You're gonna aspire to things. You're going to want to do things, and then you're going to discover that try as hard as you can, you fall on your face. And hopefully you understand grace and you receive forgiveness. That's what this was all about this morning as we took communion. But look at verse 10. So Jesus said to them again, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. He will go in and out and find pasture. And then verse 10, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. What was the first question in the Bible? Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. Adam and Eve, Satan approaches Eve, who for some reason is alone from Adam. And what's the first question recorded in the Bible? Did God say? And Eve says, very interesting, if you have not thought about this lately, she says, God says not to eat this. If we eat this, we will die. Now, sometimes we forget about this idea. We think, oh, well, death was not in Adam and Eve's consciousness until they fell. Actually, it was prior to that. She was aware of death. Before she took the apple and then gave it to Adam, and they both, failed, she was aware of death. That was her response to Satan. She said, if we do this, we'll die. How did she know about death? Because God had told them. So he knows our nature. And you know what that first question was? And we're going to come back to this in a couple minutes when we conclude. You know what Satan's first question was, among other things? It was a distraction. If you can distract, and that's the whole mission of Satan to you and I today, to distract us. And in all kinds of ways to distract us. But what does he say in verse 10? That we also, even though we're sheep, even though we're fallen people, following in the footsteps of Adam and Eve, I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. that you and I still have the capacity for not just life, but abundant life. And not just, as we said several months ago, 3 words for life in the Bible, right? Bios, our physical bodies, suke, our mental life, and then zoe, the life of the soul, the spirit. And Jesus said, this is the word that it's, zoe is the word that's used here. And he says, not only do I offer you bios, I give you a body, I give you a mind, but now I offer you eternal quality of life, and it's abundant. It's not just little, but it's abundant. That's what I have to offer. The only thing the thief has to offer you is death. And that's what Satan's goal is, right? To kill you. Jesus says, I'm here as I'm the door, I'm the one who gives access, I'm the shepherd, I'm the one who gives care. And then he continues on with this theme of the sheep. I have an older brother. I was talking to him last night, and our grandfather that lived in Missouri raised sheep, and we would go in the summertime. We would spend time on his farm. And my brother, because he was older, my grandfather gave him responsibility for the newborn lamb. Lambs are usually born in April, March, somewhere in there. And then my brother would go back and he'd spend the whole summer, spend 3 months. So when my brother got to the farm, my grandfather would say, okay, here's 25 lambs. For the next 3 months, you take care of them. My brother told me last night some fascinating things. 3 things I just want to mention before we close this out. He said, first of all, after 3 months, those lambs, I'd go out and feed them and shepherd them, and I'd spend every day with them. They knew my voice, and he said by the end of the summer, they wouldn't go. When my grandfather would come into the pasture, the sheep would run away. But when I walked in, they came to me. They knew my voice. And I brought food. It's not just the grass, but we also had a separate food trough for them. So that was number one. Second thing he said was that sheep fight a lot. Don't know if you think a sheep is so gentle, but they fight with the rams use their horns, but the sheep butt each other. They butt heads. And one of the things that my grandfather didn't do it, but a lot of worldwide, this is very common. Shepherds anoint the head of a sheep. Why? So when they butt heads, it'll be a glancing blow. The blow won't be so hard. The damage won't be as bad because the oil will you'll kind of bounce off a little bit. What does that remind you of? What Jeff Ledoux read 20 minutes ago? Psalm 23. You anoint my head with oil. Who said that? King David. Pretty competent person. Kind of a type A, aggressive personality. And yet even David said, I'm like a sheep. I've been a shepherd, but I'm also like a sheep. I need a shepherd, right? The third thing that my brother mentioned to me was that there's this word in the shepherding world called when a sheep is cast. Have you heard that term before? A cast sheep. That's when a sheep lies down, and animals, they want to relax and sleep a little bit. So you'll see a sheep that will lie down on its side, but if a sheep begins to turn a little bit and gets on their back, they can't get up. And what happens is the gases in their stomach begin to just kind of expand, and then their feet are straight up. That's what's called a cast sheep. They can't get up. And the only way they can get up, and then they're prey animals. That's when wolves come in and eat sheep, right? Because they can't defend themselves. So the shepherd has to put them back on their feet, but in order to do that, before they raise them up, you know what they do? They rub their legs to restore the circulation. So when they get back on their feet, they'll be able to stand. Now, if you're a sheep, and if I'm a sheep, when I fall on my face, when I'm And how many times have you ever been on your back? So many times. When you get knocked down and you're on your back and you can't get up, do you have any understanding that Christ not only can raise, that one of the ways Christ raises you up is he restores your circulation in order to put you back in circulation? That's what forgiveness is. That's what grace is. And that's because it's part of our nature. We need that. Well, lastly, our nature leads to our need. So therefore, if all this is true, someone who knows your need, and we're not going to read the rest, but we'll come back to some of this next week. But in 11 to 21, I will read this verse 11. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Two words in Greek language for good. One is agathos. Agathos means something is morally good. You did a good thing. But there's another word, and that's the word that's used here. That's called kalos. And kalos means that it's not only a good thing that you did, but it's a beautiful thing that you did. There's beauty attached to the moral goodness of what you did. That's the word that's used here. And Jesus describes himself, I'm not only a shepherd, but I'm a good, what I do is not only morally good, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. That's the grace of God. Because I lay down my life for the sheep, not only on the cross, but in the ancient world, shepherds typically laid in the gate at night. So if an enemy came, a thief came, or a prey animal came, they had to go through the shepherd to get to the sheep. And so I lay down my life, not only physically, but on the cross to take care of your debt, as we sang earlier. And then let me jump down to my verse 15. Just as the Father knows me, I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this fold. That's us. You're one of the other sheep, so am I. I must bring them also. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me. Jesus was not a helpless victim. Read Luke 23, verse 46 sometime. Into my hands I commit my spirit, right? Jesus volunteered to go to the cross. He chose to do it. He was not a helpless victim. And then the last thing here is there's this division of opinion because of this. Some believed him, some didn't. I just want to close with a couple of thoughts here, okay? And then we'll come back to some of this next week. First of all, just in terms of the three things, staying with the sheep analogy. First of all, sheep have no defense mechanism. Without a shepherd, they're helpless. So that's number one. Secondly, sheep are known for being followers. Even if they're being led to danger. It's kind of a herd instinct. If you've ever been around, I saw this on my grandfather's farm because they knew my brother's voice. They didn't know me. Sometimes I'd go out in the pasture and I hadn't been there long enough. And as soon as I'd appear or say something, they'd just take off. But there was always one sheep that led them. And some of them went right into the pond. They're not particularly smart, but the third thing is sheep are prone to wander. Remember that song, what's the hymn, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing? Sometimes we sing that. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the one I love. Had that happen to you this week? You know, you say you're a follower of Jesus, I love Jesus, and then I don't follow him. I'm prone to wander, right? So true. And why do they wander? They wander because they're distracted by greener grass. They're distracted by greener grass. And when a sheep leaves the flock, What do they become susceptible to? Danger. Because let's say there's a lion in Africa, sheep herders, if you meet an African shepherd, they'll tell you this, lions eat sheep. Lions never attack a flock. They only attack a sheep that's gone off by themselves. And usually the sheep has gone off by themselves because they think there's greener grass. Now let's bring that back to Trinity Baptist for a moment. We're not being legalistic or hard-nosed when we say you really need to be here on Sunday. Hopefully we're being kind and gracious because we're saying to you, if we don't see you, maybe you're wandering. And if you're wandering, maybe you're in danger. We need to be together. We need to be together. Last slide. John, put that up on the board. So I got one last question for you. We had 4 questions. Now we got one last question. What distracts you? If the ultimate relationships in life are vertical and horizontal, if Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself, and everything's summed up in that, what distracts you from that? I never want to ask you a question that I don't ask myself first, so I've been asking myself that question this week. Here's a preliminary answer. I think, especially after the last month of travel, I think this is now the national distraction. I was in a restaurant for dinner a couple of weeks ago, and I think this was the final straw. I've been thinking about it for a long time, but I think this was the final straw. Family came in, sat right at the table next to me, mother, father, 2 teenage children, and we overlapped about 25 minutes maybe. I wasn't eavesdropping. I didn't need to eavesdrop. It was just visual. For the whole 25 minutes I was there, mom was on her phone, dad was on his phone, daughter was on his phone, son was on his phone. Not one word of conversation between them. And I looked at this and I said to myself, I don't think this is good for our future. On the other hand, our little prayer gathering here this morning, we got into this subject. Actually, if you have a balanced view, I'm really glad we have these. So I'm not contradicting myself. I'm just saying that this can be a distraction, but don't throw it away, because you can read your Bible on this. You can get an emergency call. You can save somebody's life with this. You don't have to go look for a payphone and hopefully have a quarter in your pocket to make a phone call if somebody's in trouble. So there's a lot of advantages. So I am thrilled that we have this and the internet. But friends, it's a national distraction. At the same time, it's a national blessing. Most blessings have curses. Most privileges have responsibilities. And so that's a question this week. Think about that. Next week, we'll continue on with chapter 10. And we've got this beautiful, I can't think of a song I like more right now than what we're just about to sing, because this just sums up foundational truth. If you don't know this song, Here Is Love, it was the theme song 120 years ago over in Wales. One of the greatest revivals of Christianity in the history of the world took place in the little country of Wales. And this was the song. This was the song that just defined that whole movement of God all through the British Isles. So we're gonna sing it, and then we'll go on to our next fellowship time.